describe the scene in the courtroom and just what you remember James Risen saying.
Well, so it was a tense moment. Jim took the stand, obviously reluctantly. He had been fighting this for about 7 years, trying to stay off the stand. He took this fight to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to hear it, so he was under order to testify. But very weirdly, sort of at the last minute, kind of under pressure from journalist groups and civil rights groups, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, made a decision and said that his prosecutors were not going to force Risen to give up his source. And so the questioning was really weird. It was sort of like, if I asked you who your source was, what would you say? And of course, he said, well, I wouldn't say it. So it was this weird dance where the government was basically trying to say, did you have a confidential source? Did you promise a source confidentiality? And was just trying to like nibble around the edges. And a lot of those questions, almost all of those questions, Risen had answered in an affidavit years ago, just saying, this is a confidential source arrangement I've had, and I'm not going to give up any information. But even that basic information was sort of like pulling teeth with Jim on the stand.
So what does this mean in terms of Sterling's actual trial? Was it your sense that Risen will be called as a witness in the trial?
You know, it's hard to say. I don't totally understand what the government gets from having Jim on the stand. But of course, I don't see the whole case, so I don't know what it's hard for me to see the value. But that at this stage is not unusual. I suppose there's value for him helping them kind of bolster their circumstantial case, right? I mean, he can say, yes, I interviewed Jeffrey Sterling on the record for this 2002 time story that's unrelated to this case, so clearly establishing that he knew Sterling, and then say, yes, I had these confidential sources for Chapter 9 of my book. And then the government introduces the sort of the electronic records, the phone records and email records that show they were in contact around that time. And I suppose in that case, Risen's testimony helps them bolster their circumstantial case. But the defense says, hey, look, without Risen testifying, you have no evidence proving that Sterling was the one who gave up this information. Simply saying they talked to each other doesn't prove anything. So it's quite possible that the defense will call him because he testified at this preliminary hearing that he had multiple sources. So that obviously could be helpful for Sterling. So it's possible he ends up testifying as a defense witness. So it's a very odd moment we're in right now. I think this really starts around the time that Risen and Eric Lischblau reported in the Times and also in Jim's book about the NSA's warrantless wiretap program. Obviously, that spurned a large investigation, so the government was clearly looking for their sources in that story in early 2006. I think there's that may have morphed into this case where now they're looking at this Chapter 9 where Risen writes in his book about this botched CIA operation in Iran where the CIA gave nuclear schematics to Iran that they had introduced design flaws to in hopes of setting back the nuclear program. But Jim's book reveals that these flaws were easily spottable and that Iran probably just worked right around them. So we may have actually even helped advance the nuclear program. So there's this big leak investigation in John Rizzo's book, the former CIA general counsel. He has this amazing scene where he describes where the CIA and the White House finally see this book, Risen's book, and it's New Year's Eve, and they're desperate to figure out how can they stop it from hitting the shelves. How can they stop State of War from hitting the shelves? And they're working all night to see can we get all the books recalled? And I mean, finally, obviously, they realize that logistically that was impossible. So the book comes out. There's a big leak investigation, and ultimately they focus on Jeffrey Sterling, who is a CIA officer involved in this Iran program. And Risen's been fighting efforts to get the government's been trying to put him on the stand for years, first through Attorney General Mukasey, and then ultimately through Attorney General Holder. Have been trying to put him on the stand for years, and he's been fighting for 7 years.